Hello, everyone. I am Reginé Gilbert. I'm currently an industry assistant professor at New York University in the Integrated Design and Media program. I teach user experience design as well as co-teaching assistive technology courses, and I am a part of our Ability project. So here on the screen, I have an image of a Pokemon Go logo from Niantic. How many people here have played Pokemon Go? Just curious. You can type it up in the chat. Well, I'll tell you about my first encounter. I was working in New York City near Fifth Avenue in Central Park area, and I saw a very large crowd of people running. And in my mind, if when you see a large crowd running, you might panic a little bit. And I said, "Oh my goodness, what is going on?" And there were a few people who were not running, they were walking. And I stopped one of them and I said, "What is going on?" They said, "It's Pokemon." I said, "What? This is wild. I mean, it was hundreds of people running. And from there, I began to get interested in what is this Pokemon? What is this all about? For those who are not aware, Pokemon Go is a mobile game that uses augmented reality where people will chase Pokemons and different characters around towns and different places. And so one of the things that I get the pleasure of doing is I get to co-teach, and I co-teach a class called Looking Forward each semester with Gus Chalkias. And Gus is blind. And I had mentioned Pokemon Go to Gus and described it. And Gus said, "I wish I could play." And I thought to myself, why can't he play? Because he's blind? This didn't make sense to me. So this is actually what prompted me to get interested in researching inclusion and accessibility in the augmented reality and virtual reality space. So have you tried VR or virtual reality? Let me know in the chat. I'm very curious. Have you tried VR? I'll just take a look to see what people are saying. Yes, there's a few no's. Yes, yes. Okay. No, a lot of yeses and no's. For less than a minute. Okay. Yes to reality. Great. So the truth is that 97.81% of the world hasn't tried VR yet. And this is from Pablo Cardenas. It's a pretty large amount of people when you think about it. 97.81% of the world hasn't tried VR yet. Have you tried augmented reality? Anyone here augmented reality? No, I'm seeing a bunch of no's. If anyone has used any sort of filters on Instagram or Snapchat or anything like that. Okay, good to know. Thank you for letting me know here. So this here on the screen, I have a chart of the number of mobile augmented reality active users worldwide from 2019 to an estimated 2024, and this is in the billions. So in 2019, it was 0.44, in 2020, 0.6, 2021, 0.81, 2022, 1.07, expected for 2023, 1.4, and expected for 2024, 1.73. So in essence, what we see is there's going to be more and more people actually using augmented reality on their phones. So currently, XR, which stands for extended reality, and extended reality is an umbrella term used for both augmented reality and virtual reality, is currently being used with artificial intelligence, assistive technologies, business and retail, communication, education, empathy, entertainment, recreation events, gaming, health and rehabilitation, meetings, navigation, therapy, training, video programming, virtual assistants, and wayfinding. When it comes to artificial intelligence, and thank you, Crystal, for speaking earlier about AI and bias, artificial intelligence and accessible XR, artificial intelligence and machine learning are crucial tools in making extended reality a more realistic opportunity for everyone. For example, it's easier for software to track things like gestures, eye movements, through intelligent systems, which could make augmented and mixed reality environments more immersive. But as Crystal brought up, there are also problems with this as well. And so that's something that we need to consider as we move forward. There are gaps with artificial intelligence, XR, and accessibility. So those who have been born discrimination in the past are most at risk of harm from bias and exclusionary AI in the present. And when these discriminatory logistics are reproduced and amplified by AI systems, they are likely to be read as authoritative, the product of sophisticated technology. This means that not all technology is all right, as we know. So beyond biased data, additional risks are presented by the significant power asymmetries between those with the resources to design and deploy AI systems and those who are classified, ranked, and assessed by these systems. The history of disability itself can be read as a story of the ways in which various systems of classification, for example, medical, scientific, legal, interface with social institutions and their articulations. So when it comes to accessibility challenges with XR, the number one thing is, as we see on the web, accessibility is often an afterthought. Controllers often require the use of both hands. Inputs and outputs of experiences don't offer accessibility options. Affordances and usability do not account for people with disabilities. Depending on the medium, up to 90% of an environment cannot be controlled. So for example, with augmented reality, which oftentimes people will use a mobile device or potentially some sort of wearable like a glass. I'm holding on to my glasses at the moment. Then you can't control what's around you. Whereas if you are putting on a VR headset, you have a lot more control of that space. Experience depends on bodies being in a certain position in order to move, and some experiences are based on audio or visual alone. So there is some guidance out there from the W3C, which I think is pretty good. Some things designers and authors need to be aware of is that understanding specific diverse user needs and how they relate to XR, successfully identifying modality needs that are not obvious but still need to be supported, and suitable authoring tools that support accessibility requirements in XR. Some other things is using languages, platforms, and engines that support accessibility semantics, providing accessible alternatives for content and interaction. So not just having something be visual, maybe there's an audio component, maybe there is a haptic feedback component to that. The provision of specific commands within the VR environment, for example, to go directly to a specified location or to follow another user, which assists the navigation to support different modalities. Personally, for me, I get a little sick in VR. And so there are times where I will have to close my eyes in order to move forward, depending on the type of locomotion that's involved or movement. So the use of virtual assistive technologies, for example, the white cane via haptic feedback, could be used to provide non-visual feedback. The research identified that if the same audio cues associated with a real-world infrared white cane were used in an immersive environment, users were able to effectively center themselves in the middle of pathways and walk successfully through virtual doorways based on the same audio feedback as used in the equivalent real-world device. So the W3C XR user needs and requirements are to have immersive semantics and customization, motion agnostic interactions, immersive personalization, interaction and target customization, voice commands, color changes, magnification, context, and resetting, critical messaging and alerts, and gestural interfaces and interactions. In addition, signing videos and text description of information transformation, safe harbor controls, immersive time limits, orientation and navigation, second screen devices, interaction speed, avoid sickness triggers, spatial audio tracks and alternatives, spatial orientation, so this is providing a mono audio option, and captioning, subtitling, and text, and offering that support and customization. So why is accessibility in XR important? I mean, I feel like I'm speaking to the choir here. It's the right thing to do. It's simply the right thing to do. So a question for everyone, and maybe you could add this to the chat for me. When you think of someone who uses virtual reality or augmented reality, who do you think of? If you're thinking of physical characteristics of someone, who do you think of? So I'm seeing gamers, young people, non-disabled people, the kid from Ready Player One, able-bodied, colorblind, wealthy people. Someone says no physical characteristics in particular. Hearing people, gamers, teenagers, someone using it with two hands. Tech fearless folks. Okay. So thank you. Thank you all for putting those in. When I've asked this question in the past, most people think of someone who is able-bodied, someone who is young, someone who is tech savvy. And oftentimes people are not thinking of a 50-year-old non-binary person who might be in a wheelchair. And so one of the things that I want to promote is that we start thinking of people who use these type of technologies as it could truly be anyone. It could be anyone. So designers focus on human-centered design, but we have to ask ourselves, which humans are we focusing on? Right? So Walk-in VR is a really cool plugin that can be used for helping folks with disabilities experience VR. I won't play this video now, but I would recommend folks to check out Walk-in VR. It's a great, really great thing. So Walk-in VR is available on Steam, and it's meant for adapting VR games for people with disabilities. Walk-in VR has been tested to make VR accessible for people with cerebral palsy, spinal cord injury, traumatic brain injury, muscular dystrophies, spinal muscular atrophies, neuropathy, and orthopedic problems. And here I have an image of the Walk-in VR logo, which is a person in a wheelchair holding controllers in each hand with arms spread wide. So I want to talk a bit about my ongoing research, which is examining inclusion and accessibility in the extended reality space. So when I first got into thinking about, inclusion and accessibility, I said, what am I doing? This is too big of a topic, but where do I start? And so I decided to start with the tools. So on the screen, I have an image of a Google Sheet, which is showing the name of tools, cost, enterprise, purpose, accessibility features, programming languages, scripting languages, supported platforms, system requirements, and features. So this ultimately became a list of XR development tools and SDKs, which is also software known as software development kits. And I really wanted to get to understand, is this inclusive? Is this are the tools themselves inclusive or accessible? Do they cost money? Do people need to know a certain type of programming language to even create something? Or can they just hop in? So ultimately, I thought it was a little boring to just have a spreadsheet. So Saki Asakawa and I came up with XR City. So here is the image is a neon sign of XR City, an opaque subway map with stops at free game, VR, accessibility, and AR. So we ended up creating a subway map, which I'm obsessed with. And this was created last year, the XR City map. On the map, we had different subway lines for gaming, drawing, AR, 3D framework, character, prototyping, modeling, animation. We have a little A11Y, and this was to show if something had a VPAT available. We also had things for an icon for enterprise plan, and if something was VR. And then we also paid particular attention to if something was paid in free or free. Because if something is, you have to pay for something, that's a barrier to entry, and that's not inclusive. In addition, I joined this group called VAIL in 2020, an international group, research group, who are looking at design patterns in VR to examine the design patterns in VR and expand on the research by specifically looking at accessibility in VR. So my research assistant and I, Assad, we decided to look specifically at VR and accessibility. And in the process, we learned that the current challenges were that accessibility options, like I said earlier, are an afterthought in most cases. There was no real focus on accessibility options. There was very little awareness for challenges faced by users, and there were limited development tools available for smaller companies. So here I have an image of a person who is doing some VR, but there are also titles that we examined. The first was Beat Saber. Beat Saber is a VR game that user navigates through an obstacle course with emphasis on a song being played. We also looked at the Waltz of Wizard, where a user goes through a maze of different challenges to progress through a story. The other titles we examined were Rec Room, which is a collection of user-made rooms that a person can join and interact with other people. We also looked at Epic Roller Coasters, where a user sits through various different roller coaster rides. I will say this also, if someone is doing VR for the first time, don't ever do a roller coaster ride. It's probably not the best one to do. Bait is a fishing simulator, and Echo VR, where a user plays with other players in a unique sports space. So in the examination of these various titles, there were common issues present in most of the titles, and the type of accessibility options that are offered are limited. So the issues with accessibility options are physical reactions, psychological reactions, barriers to entry and widespread adoption, and the cost of the head-mounted displays. Thank you, Chaz, for the note that slides and animations are distracting and potentially ill-making to you. Sorry about that. Sincere apologies. I will make sure to take those out. So we had very few accessibility options, the lack of extensive tutorials in some titles. There was little flexibility for different playstyles, and it was not friendly for smaller spaces. I think a lot of the VR games that exist were made for much bigger spaces than where, for example, if somebody is in a New York apartment. So some common accessibility options are hand tracking, playing while sitting, playing with one hand, haptic feedback, subtitles, allowing for room scale or stationary guardian, and different locomotion options. So for those who are not familiar, locomotion is a type of movement that you can do in VR, and offering different types of locomotion makes things a little bit more accessible in VR. So hand tracking, here I have an image of two hands that are grabbing for a bar, trying to reach for a red button. So the issue with hand tracking is that it doesn't allow full control that a user might have when they're actually using a controller. When someone is playing while sitting, there's limited movement when trying to play while sitting, and sometimes the inability to rotate. So if you're sitting and say you cannot rotate, this became an issue. When it comes to other issues with accessibility options, haptic feedback, here I have an image of someone holding in virtual world spider, and there's a hand here with contraption that is actually giving the person the feedback that they're feeling in the virtual world. So oftentimes with the controllers that exist, the feedback is not accurate to what is happening in the experience, and there's usage of generic feedback for most of the motions. Here's an image of the Locomotion Vault. So the Locomotion Vault is a really cool project that a few PhD students worked on, where they captured all the different types of locomotion, the different types of movement in the virtual world. So some options might cause issues for the user, such as motion sickness. And one of the other things that we looked at was cost. This is, I have 3 different images of 3 different VR headsets, and the RS stands for rupee. So a Quest 2 headset, which is $299 in the United States, is 50,000 rupee. A Vive Pro is $799. This is 132,000 rupee. And a Valve Index is $999 and 165,000 in rupee. In essence, a Quest 2 headset, which is $299 and 50,000 rupee, could cost someone a 1 month's salary. So when it comes to inclusion and thinking about this, one of the barriers to entry to VR is the cost. It's quite expensive for a lot of folks. So one of the things that I hope to get out of my ongoing research is a set of heuristics. So our objectives are to evaluate existing experiences for inclusion and accessibility, highlight and address the key gaps and pain points in XR, understand why these issues are present, think and create of a framework, toolkit, guidelines that address the current design solutions, and then present the guidelines for others to implement readily in their designs. So ultimately, the idea is to produce a framework, a toolkit, and guidelines for inclusion and accessible XR experiences. And then in addition to that, create an actual example of an accessible experience in both AR and VR. And so initially we're starting with augmented reality. So on the screen, I have 2 screenshots of Google's beta augmented reality for Google Maps. So we began examining mobile augmented reality, specifically and looking at what we can use to help content creators evaluate experiences. And we started by using Google Maps. Next, I began looking at accessible filters for Instagram, and what might an accessible filter look like for Instagram. and to check to see if Instagram is screen reader accessible. Posts are screen reader accessible. However, Instagram stories and reels are not. And the place where people will use Instagram stories and reels is with those not being screen reader friendly. Uh, it was very difficult to think about, well, how could we make an Instagram filter accessible? So one of the other projects that my students work on is they're making working on the UX for NASA soundscapes. And so the NASA soundscapes project is working to make Eclipse accessible for the blind and low vision communities. This is a long ongoing project. There are going to be Eclipse happening in 2023 and 2024, and folks will be uploading sounds, and those sounds will then be available for people to listen to. But one of the things that needs to happen between now and then is that we need to be able to promote citizen science, which could be anybody. It could be you, it could be me, for folks to upload these sounds. So one of the ways that my students came up with promoting citizen science is to create a filter for Instagram that would let people know when the eclipse is going to occur. So one of the things we did, in order to create an Instagram filter, there are a few ways you could actually do it. We checked out Spark AR, Unity, and Unreal in terms of the tools that we would use. We thought initially we may be able to use Spark AR, but it had limited accessibility options, especially compared to developing on Unreal. Spark AR is useful for general prototyping, for figuring out sizing, positioning, and how it looks on your development, but it wasn't as accessible as we would have liked. But due to our time constraints this past summer, we ended up using Spark AR. So we were able to test the AR filter with 13 people between the ages of 14 and 18. And on the screen, I have an image of a young person who is masked, and they're looking at a mobile device, and above their head, it says annual solar eclipse is in 430 days. So we were able to test the AR filter, and the key insights were that people were not aware that there was ability to add sound to a filter. Most participants said they would only use the filter once, which was an interesting thing. I was like, okay. And then they would like more options for visual features. So here is a video of the filter, and it has sound to it. So I'm just going to play this video briefly. It's 15 seconds.
The next annular solar eclipse is on October 14th, 2023. The next total solar eclipse is on April 8th, 2024.
So when people use Instagram, everything in general is pretty visual. And so we decided to add this audio element so that we're able to make it more accessible for folks. This is a project that's going to continue on this semester, where I will have a small group of grad and undergrad students who will continue the work from this past summer. So one thing I want to say is everything around us has been designed, even systems of inequality. I think we all know that because, again, I feel like I'm speaking to the choir. Everyone is here at an accessibility conference. So a question, that I ask of myself often is how can we make sure that we are designing inclusive and equitable outcomes for all, no matter how big or small the decision? We can start small, right? I initially started with this idea that I got from having a discussion with a colleague about Pokemon Go. That's where this all came from. And thinking about what could be, right? Defining what could be. getting involved in groups or organizations, and then celebrating the little wins. So you can begin learning about the XR space. I highly recommend that we all do. Look into organizations such as the A11Y VR, the W3C, XR Access, PEAT, and the XR Association. So the A11Y VR meets up monthly to discuss accessibility in VR. Some past events include designing a participatory workshop with Indira Knight, Haptics for XR with Eric Vizzoli and Tim Stutz, and Ideas for Ally Programs in XR Tech Companies with Bill Curtis Davidson. The W3C has created the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, which I referred to earlier in this presentation, and is working on guidelines related to XR. There is XR Access, which is a virtual, augmented, and mixed reality for people with disabilities. It's a community committed to making virtual, augmented, and mixed reality accessible to people with disabilities. And there is the XR Accessibility Project. The XR Accessibility Project is an initiative driven by the XR Association and XR Access to provide a central place for developers to find solutions for creating accessible code across various XR platforms. I am part of XR Access, I should say that. We were inspired by developers, key players, in ensuring that this technology is accessible. For who reported challenges in finding accessible code snippets. So it features strategies, code, and tutorials to solve accessibility concerns across a wide range of platforms. An index that points to resources all over the internet organized by platform, validation of resource usability and functionality, and a contribution form for adding additional resources to the project. So it's a really good resource to check out. I want to thank my research assistants over the years that have helped with this work. Kayulu Sakiasakawa, Asad Mahmood, Blessing Amole, Lauren Chun, and Isabella Lopez. So my last question for you all, and I'd love for people to put in the chat, no matter where you are, what you do, what will you do to make a more equitable future? I'd love to know. So Anil says, learn more, awareness, thinking accessibility first. Invite more people with disabilities. Keep accessibility in the forefront. Yeah, don't make it an afterthought. Yeah, this is great. I just think the world would be better if we thought accessibility first. I don't know why we don't do it more. Center disabled people. Yeah. Thank you all. Thank you for sharing. And I'm going to leave you with this last quote from Nipsey Hussle, the late great. If you start small and build on what you have, you can continue to multiply that into something greater while picking up all the valuable lessons along the way. So thank you. I can be reached at Twitter, on Twitter at REG_INEE. And my email, if anyone is interested in reaching out, is rg1508@nyu.edu. Thank you all.